Research impact, definition and capture. My name is Roger Watson and I'm one of the professors of nursing in the School of Health Sciences at St. Francis University in Hong Kong. This presentation is aimed mainly towards colleagues at St. Francis University, but not only in health sciences, in other schools as well. My own background with respect to research assessment is that I was a panel member of the research assessment exercise in 2008, and then subsequently in 2014 I was a panel member of the Research Excellence Framework in the UK. These are government funded exercises to look at the quality of research and subsequently the impact of research in UK universities. And I've seen the transition therefore from pure research assessment through to research assessment with impact in the Research Excellence Framework. I've also been involved in subsequent research assessment exercises and previous research assessment exercises. I've led 3 altogether in 2 universities. I've been involved in one way or another with research assessment since 1989 when the research selectivity exercise was carried out in the UK. That was the second such exercise. I've been involved in every exercise since, and I've been advising on research assessment, including impact, in the UK in several universities, also in Hong Kong and also in Australia. This particular presentation is aimed mainly towards what's happening in Hong Kong, although Hong Kong has tended simply to follow the UK model, and I'm assuming that next time round it will do the same. Last time the research assessment exercise was conducted in Hong Kong 2020, impact was set at 15% of the overall assessment. Now, we're not sure if this will increase next time round, but in the UK it has increased with every research excellence framework. So clearly it's not the majority of the research assessment. There are other aspects to it, primarily research outputs and publications. However, 15% is still a fairly sizable percentage, and especially if this increases, we need to pay particular attention to the contribution that impact makes towards the research assessment exercise. I think it's useful to take a look initially at the research assessment exercise as it is portrayed in Hong Kong, and we can do no better than go to the University Grants Committee webpage where the research assessment exercise from 2020 is displayed in detail, and it looks like the screenshot here. In the middle of that screen you will have seen a hexagon with impact statements, and if we click on that we are taken in to the impact submissions, and we can see the overall statistics here for the number of universities and the number of assessment panels, number of staff who are involved and so forth. And we can also dig deeper, so we can click on the top at the impact case studies database and we will see a screen like the next one. This tells you that there were 342 case studies, and we can search for them by unit of assessment, in our case nursing, or whichever other subject is listening to the presentation, but I'm going to use nursing as an example, and also by university. Now, as St. Francis was not involved in this last time round, I'm going to look at another university. So I've typed in here under the unit of assessment, it was unit of assessment 5 in Hong Kong, nursing, optometry and so forth, other allied health professions, and for the university I have typed in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And when you click at the bottom of the screen, you're taken to 2 case studies, one on preventing and managing cerebrovascular disease and one on improving the uptake of cervical cancer screening by minority communities. Now I've chosen to click on the top one, and that will open up further details. So once you click on that case study, this is the view you get. You get the keywords associated with it at the top in a standard format for all of the case studies. There are 5 sections here: summary of impact, underpinning research, references to the research, details of the impact, and sources to corroborate the impact. These are identical to the criteria that we use in the UK, and indeed I'll use UK material later to demonstrate more about the process. The two exercises in the UK and Hong Kong are almost identical. So you can see that you have to present some summary of the impact so that people know what to expect. It has to be linked to some underpinning research that was carried out in the institution by people in the institution within a certain period, and when those people were there. Those are sort of details that are presented before the exercise. They change slightly each time. You must provide references to the research. In other words, how do you know it's been picked up, what the details of the impact are, usually using sort of numbers there if at all possible, and then sources to corroborate the impact. So as you can see, it's not just an exercise in telling people about the impact you've made. It's an exercise in actually describing it in detail and providing sources to corroborate it. You must prove that the impact has taken place. So you can get the impression from this there's no better time to start gathering details about impact than yesterday, really. It needs to be done all the way through research projects, and at St. Francis you're already well ahead of this in the sense that you're very sensibly using replicas of the RGC research forms for your own internal purposes, and indeed you have to use those for external purposes for the RGC. And in those documents now is contained a section in which you've got to describe as part of your research application the pathways to impact. I prefer it to be called potential pathways to impact, because there's no guarantee that any research will lead to impact. And that, of course, brings me to another point, is that when you are presenting impact case studies, you have to choose them very carefully, and you will be given guidance on the number that you need to submit based on the number of staff that you return in the exercise. But these are all details, they're not worth memorizing. They'll all be presented in advance of the exercise in a comprehensive document and on the web page, but you can check the existing exercise for 2020 and see the sort of criteria that were presented there. So all of that's presented in advance. I want to focus here specifically on impact. So if we click on the details of the impact, we'll see a little bit more about how this is presented. So you can see under details of impact there, it's a narrative, and a narrative broken down into various sections, describing, for example, 4.1, the CV Health Cerebrovascular Info site, and then 4.2, caring for yourself, managing your diabetes, another website, and 4.3, path to vitality and vibrancy, so an interactive platform which can be used by people to see how to avoid cardiovascular or cerebrovascular disease. So the details of the impact are described by way of a narrative and a sectioned narrative, and the more specific you can be there, the better. But again, there's not too much point in worrying in detail about this at the moment, because when it comes to writing these sort of statements, they will go through a great deal of revision internally, and will also have external eyes on them to ensure that they are written and presented in the best possible way. So writing impact statements usually takes several drafts. Okay, that's a sort of background to the exercise internationally, my own background, and a little bit about the exercise in Hong Kong. I want to be more general now and turn to what is impact, and then look at examples and look at the sort of things that you might have to do internally to capture that impact and to make sure that you are keeping the right sort of impact and also presenting it appropriately for a subsequent research assessment exercise. So, very specifically, what counts as impact? Impact includes, but it's not limited to, an effect on, change or benefit to an activity, attitude, awareness, behaviour, capacity, opportunity, performance, policy, practice, process, or understanding. It's very, very wide, very wide. You have to really be quite imaginative when you're looking for the impact of your research. And on an audience, some sort of beneficiary, a community, a constituency, an organisation, or individuals. And it can be in any geographic location, whether locally, regionally, nationally, or internationally. And it's often summarised by saying that the impact can be social and economic, and you'd have to check the guidance very carefully to see whether educational impact is included. This changed in the UK between the two recent REF exercises. In the first one, educational impact could not be taken into account. In the more recent exercise, educational impact could be taken into account, provided it wasn't within your own institution. So educational changes may be included. So you're looking for social, economic, and possibly educational changes. Impact's got nothing to do with research impact in terms of citations or impact factors or anything like that. And finally, of course, it doesn't have to be a positive impact. It can be a reduction of harm or prevention of risk, which of course is positive, but you can be looking for negative effects as well as positive effects. As I say, I think the watchword when it comes to impact is imagination, is being imaginative to see how could our research have impact, where is it having impact, how does it fall broadly within these categories, and how can we prove that, and how can we explain it? This is rather a small writing on this slide, but there are lots of examples here. I'll make these PowerPoints available so people can study these in more detail. But you know, one of the things there, changes to the design or delivery of a school curriculum. That's an external educational impact. For example, costs being reduced, public debates being increased and shaped, if you can prove that. Improved access to justice, jobs have been created, changes in practice have been brought in, changes to legislation. So again, in terms of looking for specific examples related to those general areas of impact, almost anything can count, provided it is linked to your research, provided that you can prove it. And again, it really is a matter of imagination. By imagination, I don't mean making it up. I mean, it's having the imagination to think where your research could possibly have an impact, and again, gathering the evidence, putting it together in a comprehensive and convincing way. And what I'm going to do is run through some examples here. These are rather poorly reproduced, I'm afraid. This comes from an article in the Times Higher, which is a UK newspaper, and this article was produced in the wake of the first research exercise, research excellence framework, and it looked at the sort of disparate examples that could be used across different subjects. So for example, you can imagine in healthcare, it's really quite easy to look for impact. Did people get better? Was there a change of practice? In engineering and science and STEM subjects, it's much easier too, because you can look at things that were manufactured, inventions that were patented, that kind of thing. But in some areas, mathematics being one particular area, theology, philosophy, there are some areas, linguistics, for example, where it is harder perhaps to find direct examples of impact, but nevertheless, every subject area is required to do that. And again, we can see quite a bit of imagination being used here. And these were all case studies on impact that were presented to the REF in 2014. So for mathematical sciences, algorithms were developed at Cardiff University to improve data security in printing and network environments. And this led to the development of patented software by a computer company, Hewlett Packard in this case. That's impact. In engineering, the University of Bath research into engines' parasitic losses led to an estimated 40,000 tonne reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by Ford engines in 2012, saving over £18.7 million in fuel. Of course, this is not only a demonstrable impact with our focus on man-made climate change and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. This is a very topical kind of impact. But again, that's very imaginative, and of course, if you can demonstrate that, it's a very, very powerful impact case study indeed. Philosophy, research by University College London academic, provided the framework for a charity's pioneering work on self-directed support and social care, which influenced governments' putting people first strategy. So the point there is not the difficulty sometimes of finding impact in a subject like philosophy, but it's the fact that it could be demonstrated to have influence on government policy. That's a very important kind of impact to look for, is looking for citations to your work in government documents, and of course making sure that your work is cited in government documents. Classics, another area where it might be considered difficult to provide impact, but King's College London research into the contribution of Lord Byron and Romanticism to the creation of the Greek nation-state in the early 19th century challenged the modern perception of Greek national identity. So this is something that was rooted in history and the classics, but it was brought up to date in terms of an impact on perception of a national identity. I don't know how that would have been demonstrated, but nevertheless that was a case study that was returned. And King's College in London was very successful in terms of research assessment and research excellence. And law, the University of Birmingham academics monograph made a major contribution to developing the law of duress in Singapore and the Commonwealth. So that's international impact, and again, if that can be demonstrated, that's extremely powerful. Psychology, psychiatry and neuroscience, a new international standard of loudness, arose from University of Cambridge research into how sound is perceived. This is now widely used by industry. Excellent example of impact. Again, there you'd be wanting to demonstrate how widely it was used, how many industries used it, for example, and how many people that impact was felt by. Then in education, the University of Exeter research influenced pedagogy by pointing out that pupils with special educational needs often do not require specialist teaching. And I think this is the final one in history. And Edgehill University's academics' media appearances and campaigns improved public understanding of the Israel-Palestine conflict by extending the range and improving the quality of argumentation and evidence. That was a previous Israeli-Palestine conflict, not the one that's ongoing. So those are really good, I think, examples of impact. When I saw that in the Times Higher, I thought I must make a record of that, and I've been using it ever since. They demonstrate imagination, they demonstrate a wide range of kinds of impact, and they demonstrate a wide range of impact from different subject areas. And I think all of them in one way or another provide examples for each and any of the subjects and schools that might be listening to this presentation. And I think one of the key messages there was that impact which could be demonstrated in terms of numbers, and there were a couple of examples, if not 3 examples there, where impact had been seen to take place on government policy nationally and internationally. Again, that is the kind of impact that people assessing impact like to see. So case studies. I'm not going to present any case studies here. That would be more for a workshop session. I do have case studies that I can present for those if people want to do that at some point. But here in case studies, what I want to look at is how you put case studies together. And here I'm using UK material because I'm familiar with it, so you'll see the logo at the bottom. But the system in Hong Kong appears to me to be exactly the same. So using the UK Ref 2014 slides, and I've kept the logo there for copyright reasons really, because I was given these slides by the Ref management team as I was part of the exercise. And this hasn't really changed at all. Every case study should clearly describe the underpinning research, who undertook it and when. What they mean is which specific personnel were involved and when were they at your university, and the dates within which they have to be there will be audited and will be given in the guidance. If it turns out that these members of staff weren't there during that time, then I'm afraid the case study is null and void. Provide references to the research and evidence of quality. So you have to provide the specific references, and these don't have to be assessed in terms of quality in the way the outputs for the research assessment exercise or the REF are, but you have to indicate, in some other way, for example, published in a leading international journal with an impact factor of whatever. This is one area where impact factors might indeed be helpful, and you could also provide citations to them. Explain how the research led and contributed to the impact. There has to be a clear pathway, a thread that's followed between the research and the impact, and then who benefited. Clearly identify the beneficiaries, either the people or the organisations, and say exactly what the impact was. You don't have to just say that 50 people benefited from this. You have to say 50 people benefited from this by being able to walk further after our cardiovascular intervention or whatever, or 2 companies benefited by saving $1 million Hong Kong dollars a year, something like that. Then I put this in red, which of course is the most important part. You have to provide the evidence and the indicators of the impact. So for example, if your work's been cited in a government document, you have to provide the evidence for that, but you also have to provide the indicators of the impact, in the sense that it's said, made clear within the document that your research led to that impact. And then provide independent sources of corroboration. So for example, in the example I've just given there, you might want somebody who was an author of that report to corroborate that and say, yes, indeed, we were actually referring to that research, and it proved to be very useful in our deliberations, something like that. So everything needs to be there, all the material should be there, don't leave anything out. And this last point I made already in a different way, but just be aware that you don't have to represent the work of your whole unit. You have to pick the strongest examples of impact, and it's the impact you're picking, not necessarily individuals. And the number of case studies that you will return will be determined by the number of staff that you're returning, and the UGC will set that at some point just before the next exercise. Now, I've already referred to the underpinning research. So each case study must be underpinned by research that was produced by staff while working in the submitting HEI in the university. Make that point very strongly. If they don't, it will invalidate the case study. And it's got to be evidenced by outputs published between specified dates. I'm not going to give the dates. Those will be given to you before the exercise. So you need to take a couple of date parameters into account. And in the UK, and I think it's exactly the same in Hong Kong, the research must meet the quality threshold of at least equivalent to 2-star. Now, that isn't formally assessed. It's assessed by proxy. And I have to say that usually there's no problem with the research, provided it's been, for example, in areas where we use international journals with impact factors. I think that would probably be acceptable. But as I say, it's not assessed formally. Made a material and distinct contribution to the impact. There are many ways that you can get there, many routes to impact, but in each case a distinct and material contribution must be shown. This is just repeating what was said before, in the sense that there must be a thread or a pathway all the way from the research to the impact. And again, this also can depend on your imagination, not on making it up, but by finding impact that could possibly come from your research. Once the panel is satisfied that all these have been met, those are basic criteria that they then look at the reach and the significance of the impact. Now, significance is fairly easy to understand. You can say, well, is it significant in terms of the change it's made? Is it significant in terms of the money that's been saved, the number of people who've been influenced, for example? Was that government policy an important and long-lasting one? These are the sort of things that will be judged, and they're qualitative judgments. There are no quantitative criteria here. But the concept of reach is poorly understood. So case studies should provide a clear and coherent narrative linking the research to the impact, including evidence most appropriate to the case being made. Don't include anything irrelevant. Evidence can take many forms, quantitative, qualitative, and the panels will provide examples, or they do in the UK, so you can have a look at the UK material. They're not exhaustive or prescriptive. And again, just repeating what we've said before, but very important that all claims should be verifiable and independent sources of corroboration listed, and they will be used for audit purposes, so people will check up on these. Now, I mentioned in not the previous slide, but the one before, the criteria for assessing impact are reach and significance. So in assessing the case study, they will look at the significance as a whole rather than assessing each criterion separately. So they will try and take the work as a whole. There may be some fairly minor aspects to the impact, and there may be some major aspects that will be looked at as a whole. But again, that's pretty much a qualitative judgment. Reach is more difficult to define. Reach is not geographical necessarily. I mean, clearly, if research took place in Hong Kong and influenced something in America, that would certainly represent reach, but it doesn't have to be geographic, and it's not meant to be. Reach will be judged by a number of dimensions, and it can be the number of people, it can be reaching different social echelons that are hard to reach, it can be reaching hard to impact particular sectors or whatever. But reach is, again, it's difficult to define, but it will be unique to each area, and they will have working definitions of reach. By the way, these will not be given to you before the exercise. These are kept fairly confidential because they are qualitative judgments. But you need to think about in terms of reach. You need to put in everything you think that would demonstrate reach, geographical, social, that kind of thing. And when they look at the impact template overall, the panel will consider the extent to which the unit's approach is conducive to achieving impacts of reach and significance. So they will also be judging something about the way that impact is gathered and used in the department. You have to make some sort of statement about that as well. So those are the assessment criteria, but a little bit like the assessment criteria for outputs, which are given as in terms of the 2, 3, 4, 5 and star ratings and so forth. The precise criteria are not very transparent. You simply have to do the best you can to present your impact case study and hope that it will make an impression on the panel. And the best way to do that is to get people who've previously been on panels to read over your statements and get people from as wide a range of subjects as possible to do this, and they will guide you. There's no guarantee beforehand of any particular score being attained, but you can certainly get help to avoid making howling errors or leaving gaps in impact statements. Now, I would like to emphasize the importance of social networking. I think that from my experience and from the panels I've been on and from the other impact statements that I've read when I've been trying to prepare for sessions like this, and also in giving presentations like this before, I've always tried to emphasize the importance of social networking. It's not the only way that you can demonstrate impact, but social networking is one of these things that you should do regarding nearly all of your projects, and it's an easy thing to do, and it should accompany every project. And I want to show you how important it is in the next few slides, and also give you some ideas about this. So if you turn to the UK, you can probably do exactly the same thing in Hong Kong, although I haven't done it in Hong Kong. But in the impact case studies, you can actually search using keywords, and you can see the number of times that they occur across all of the impact case studies. So I searched for various keywords here. I looked for mentions of social media. So I looked for mentions of Twitter, there were 233. I looked for blogs, there were 678. I looked for podcasts, there were 214. And mentions of YouTube, including YouTube spelt differently, there were 1,350. And this was across hundreds of case studies that were returned in all subjects in the UK. And it isn't so much the numbers. I mean, that's just a clear demonstration that there were possibly more mentions of some things like YouTube than there were case studies returned, for example. But they were mentioned in multiple times, often within the case studies, a very crude measure. But I just wanted to emphasize upon you that this is a real phenomenon. Social media was used very well by some case studies to present the case for their impact. And what I want to do is show some examples of how they presented that. So the University of Cambridge, I won't read this out in detail, but this was about a naked scientist program syndicated internationally by national networks in several countries. And of course, they're giving a bit of reach there in terms of Australia, South Africa, and so forth. And it reached 1 million people, goes to 22 million downloads over a particular period, prizes it won. And then also the fact that they won the European Podcast Award for a UK non-profit podcast. Okay, so just to show you that the way that this was integrated into the overall impact. I mean, that's an outstanding impact statement there. I can't remember what that scored, but you never know exactly what any individual one scored. If they scored maximally across the impact for the number of case studies, that they all got a top score, for example. But I imagine that was scored quite easily amongst the top scores for the impact case studies. This is from my alma mater, Edinburgh, from medicine, and this is about the highly successful public engagement lecture series. Now, this is something that's counted as impact, as public engagement, giving lectures to the public on your work. And this is the Edinburgh Medical Detectives. So they also provide regularly for a national and international audience through podcasting and via YouTube, with over 35,000 hits to date. Now, those things are demonstrable, and that's big. So that's another very clear example, and another excellent. Edinburgh Medicine scored very highly on impact. Another excellent example of an impact case study. I'm not going to read it all out, that would be pointless. And the University of Oxford, and I'm using deliberately Edinburgh, Cambridge, Oxford, because these are top universities, just to show you that they do not eschew the use of social media. And here they explain how research is communicated through the press office and by interview, so forth, by writing in public meetings. And then they delineate at the end there, in addition to giving 50 public seminars and talks each year, they published more than 70 blogs, podcasts and lectures with greater than 500,000 downloads. I mean, again, that's demonstrable, it's huge, and it's a very clear indicator of impact. In those 5 lines there, about 50 or 60 words, there's an incredible amount of impact packed in there. So again, I think these things should be instructive as well for people writing impact statements here at St. Francis. And I want to make sure that you're aware of a newspaper called The Conversation. The Conversation was started by Combank in Australia, but it's spread to, there's a UK version, there's various countries, I know there's one in India. And The Conversation is a newspaper which claims to combine scientific rigour with journalistic flair. And The Conversation provides summaries of about 500, sometimes longer, articles written by academics with the help of trained journalists who work for The Conversation, which are meant to be summaries of the research, rigorous summaries, not inflated claims, just very grounded in the evidence from recent research or recent programs of research, to get this across in a way that's readable by the general public. And The Conversation is available to anyone with an academic email address, and that includes postgraduate students. It's increasingly difficult to get into The Conversation because they do get lots of submissions, but it's by no means impossible, and they do provide very clear guidance on how to write articles for The Conversation, and they also provide training as well. Now, I don't know if they work in Hong Kong or provide training here. They certainly do in the UK, but that would not would not prevent you from writing for The Conversation. And I would strongly urge people with interesting, sort of socially interesting findings, certainly, or scientifically interesting findings, to consider writing for The Conversation. It's a very good way of getting your research out, and the website follows the number of hits that you get. So again, you can demonstrate hits from The Conversation. This just happens to be an article of mine for The Conversation from quite a few years ago, and it's on a piece of research that I did in Qatar, linking directly graduate and non-graduate nurses to patient outcomes, in fact to patient survival after admission, showing that graduate nurses led to much better survival rates than non-graduate nurses. It was an interesting outcome and a direct link, and took us a little bit beyond the work of Linda Aiken, who shows much the same but in a more epidemiological way. And the article is, "You're more likely to survive hospital if your nurse has a degree." Catchy title, 500 words in there explaining the piece of research. That wasn't actually part of an impact return, but nevertheless, it could have been. That's the kind of article that you can write, and that gained thousands of hits. Gained a great deal of interest and comments, not all of them positive, I have to say. So that's just an example of something else I think you should be thinking about, and your media department should be very aware of The Conversation and helping you to make use of it. Okay, finally, preparing for impact. Those are all examples. That's what's going on in Hong Kong. There's examples from the UK. There's examples of impact which would fit anywhere. But how do you prepare for impact? Well, things to do. This is within your school. Respond to all and any consultations on impact, anything that's going on in the university or in Hong Kong or anywhere, wherever you hear the word impact, go and see what other people are doing and see if you can apply it to your own work. Build impact into research proposals. This is already being done by default here, but it's one thing to just make a statement about a potential pathway, but you've really got to mean it and think of what are the specific things that we could gather out of this. Don't set yourself impossible targets. It doesn't have to be something fantastic. It just has to be demonstrable. So think about that very, very carefully as you're writing a research proposal. I've done one research proposal recently within the college, and I found that section quite challenging, in fact. Consider impact at research meetings. Don't just talk about funding. Don't just talk about where the next research grant's coming from, or necessarily just the details of the research. Where is this likely to have impact? How are we going to gather it? Who's gathering it? And you may be able to gather that yourself. You may get help from your research office, which I don't know if it has an impact section, but most universities in the UK now have a specific impact section or impact officer within the research offices. So that might be something at a institutional level that could be considered, because it can be quite difficult for individuals sometimes to look for impact. Sometimes they don't always know where to look or how to create it or how to get things out there through the media department. Your impact officers or impact department could well help you with that. Start gathering evidence now. As I said earlier, there's no better time to start gathering evidence for impact than yesterday, but certainly start gathering evidence now. Keep thinking of what the evidence could be and keeping a note of it. It's very easy to lose that. Keep it in a folder called impact. Create the evidence now. That may sound a little bit strange, but which I mean is, if you've got a web page to your research, have a counter on it so you know how many people are looking at it. Make sure your research outcomes are translated for the general public. That can be in various ways, like the conversation or through public lectures. And hold public understanding of science lectures. Don't just talk to each other as academics. Bring in interested stakeholders in the general public. And that is a very, very clear indicator of impact. Count the number of people who were there. Set it up using an Eventbrite site so that you can actually record and provide the evidence for the number of people that went there. That's a very important thing. Don't just say that 500 people turned up. What's the evidence that 500 people turned up? And as I've already indicated, use social media, but use social media effectively. And again, there should be people within the institution who can help you to do that. Think also institutionally, at the school level and within research teams, how you can create or visualize a research impact pathway. And this is just one example. I got this from Google, but it relates to the UK research assessment and research excellence framework. You know, you've got to think, what are the inputs, what are the things you're doing, the activities, what's coming out of that, what are the outcomes of that, what's happening, and who benefits. So inputs could be research income or the people you employ. Activities could be research projects, obviously, but also workshops, conferences, and so forth. Outputs, clearly publications are important, but patents, policy briefings, media, press releases, so forth. What are the outcomes? What are the numbers associated with that? For example, if you had a press release, how many newspapers took it up and how many people potentially read it? If it went online, how many hits were there? And who benefits from that? So, and what may have been prevented as a result of something. So try to think along those lines, and have this foremost in your mind when you're writing projects, when you're discussing in research teams, and make sure that you are addressing this and ask yourself, are we actually doing those things? Are we actually gathering the kind of information that if we were asked to stop now and explain what the impact of our research is, could we do it? So try to think along those lines. And finally, thank you very much for listening. That's my email within the institution at the moment. That CIHE may change in due course, given the change in the name of the institution. If you want to look at my own research, you can scan that QR code there, and you can see my work on ORCID. You can also keep in touch with me by WeChat, if you use WeChat, by scanning that QR there. If you've really got nothing to do, you're welcome to follow me on Twitter. I warn you, that's a personal Twitter and not a professional Twitter, so don't be surprised at anything you see there. But if you want to keep up with me professionally, ORCID is probably the best way to do that. And you're welcome to contact me and to ask any questions on that email address there. So once again, I hope that was useful. Run through impact, mainly from a UK perspective, but with an eye on the Hong Kong situation, looking at how it's gathered, what it is, what the purpose is, what the examples are, and how you can not only gather impact, but generate it yourself, and also keep a record of it and present it as best you can when you're required to for the next research assessment exercise. So once again, thanks very much.